My beloved child. Don't skip. There is a reason this story begins with tears, but it does not end there. Something happened between the person you love and the third party that changed the direction of everything. Words were finally spoken that had been buried beneath hesitation, confusion, pride, and silence for far too long. And before this message reaches its final moment, you are going to understand why one sentence, "You're the one I love," left someone standing completely still. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Because what happened was not simply an emotional conversation. It was the moment pretending became impossible. For a long time, there had been an uncomfortable truth hiding beneath everything. From the outside, things may have appeared normal. Conversations happened. Smiles were exchanged. Days continued. People played their roles as though nothing important was changing beneath the surface. But feelings do not always obey appearances. And eventually, the truth asks to be acknowledged. The third party had sensed it before anyone admitted it. Something was missing. Not necessarily kindness. Not necessarily respect. Not necessarily effort. Something deeper. Presence. That invisible quality that tells you whether someone's heart is truly standing beside you or quietly wandering toward someone else. The person you love could sit in the same room, participate in the same conversations, and answer the same questions, yet something inside them seemed distant. The third party noticed. At first, they dismissed it. Maybe stress. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe temporary confusion. But then came the little moments. A pause when your name was mentioned. A change in expression when something reminded them of you. A silence that lasted slightly too long. A faraway look appearing without explanation. Those moments began forming a pattern. And patterns eventually become impossible to ignore. Don't skip now, because the first major turning point did not happen during an argument. It happened during silence. One evening, the third party asked a simple question. Are you happy? The person you love did not answer immediately. That hesitation said more than 100 sentences could have said. The room suddenly felt different. The third party looked at them carefully. Why did you have to think about it? Again, silence. The person you love looked away. Not because they wanted to be cruel. Not because they wanted anyone to suffer. But because the honest answer had finally reached the surface, and once spoken, nothing would return to exactly what it had been before. The third party understood this. Their voice became quieter. There's someone else in your heart, isn't there? Everything stopped. Stay till the end. Because the answer was not what caused the tears. The answer came later. First came the memories. The person you love suddenly remembered all the times they had tried to convince themselves that their feelings for you would disappear. They remembered telling themselves to move forward. They remembered trying to become interested in other things, other possibilities, other versions of life. They remembered pretending that silence meant closure. But every attempt led them back to the same realization. You had never completely left their heart. And that realization frightened them. Because acknowledging it meant admitting that some of their choices had been made from fear rather than truth. There were moments when they could have spoken. They stayed quiet. There were moments when they could have reached out. They hesitated. There were moments when they almost admitted everything. Then doubt arrived. What if I'm too late? What if they don't feel the same? What if I ruin everything? What if I embarrass myself? Fear became louder than love. So they stayed where things felt predictable. But predictable does not always mean peaceful. And that evening, the third party could see the conflict written across their face. Just tell me, they whispered. The person you love swallowed hard. They wanted to choose gentle words. They wanted to explain everything without causing pain. But there are moments when softening the truth too much becomes another form of dishonesty. So they finally said, I care about you. The third party's eyes changed immediately. Because everyone knows what often follows those words. But there it was. One tiny word carrying the weight of an ending. The third party looked down. You love someone else. The person you love did not deny it. And that silence became the first confession. Something huge is waiting for you, because what happened next revealed that the third party already knew more than anyone realized. They whispered your name. Your name. The person you love looked up instantly. That reaction confirmed everything. The third party gave a sad, knowing smile. I knew. Those two words landed heavily. How? Because whenever someone mentioned them, you became different. The person you love said nothing. The third party continued. You tried to hide it. Maybe you even hid it from yourself. But I could see it. There was no dramatic accusation. No cruel exchange. Only the painful honesty of someone finally acknowledging what had been sitting between them for longer than either wanted to admit. And then the third party asked the question that changed everything. If they walked through that door right now and asked you to choose, who would you choose? The person you love froze. Imagine that moment. No preparation. No time to construct the perfect answer. No opportunity to hide behind uncertainty. Just the truth. And sometimes the quickest answer comes from the deepest place. The person you love whispered. Them. The third party closed their eyes. A tear appeared. Not because they had lost some competition. Love is not a competition. They cried because certainty had finally replaced uncertainty. Sometimes uncertainty hurts more than an answer. When you do not know where you stand, hope and fear keep fighting inside you. But once truth arrives, even painful truth can become the beginning of freedom. The third party stood. They gathered themselves. The person you love immediately said, I'm sorry. And the third party answered. Don't apologize for knowing who you love. Apologize for taking so long to admit it. That sentence stayed in the room. Don't skip. The deepest part is still coming. Because the third party did something unexpected. They did not beg. They did not demand another chance. They did not try to turn you into an enemy. Instead, through tears, they looked at the person you love and said, I kept hoping I could become the person you looked at that way. The person you love lowered their eyes. But I can't become them. Silence. And I shouldn't have to. That realization changed the emotional temperature of the entire conversation. This was no longer about winning or losing. It was about three people deserving honesty. The third party deserved someone whose heart was fully present. The person you love deserved the courage to stop living against their own feelings. And you deserve not to remain an unnamed truth hidden behind somebody else's fear. Something huge is waiting for you. Because after that conversation, the person you love was left alone with one question. What now? Admitting love privately is one thing. Living honestly because of it is another. And this is where their real struggle began. The third party walked toward the door. Their eyes were filled with tears, but their voice remained steady. Before leaving, they turned around. Promise me something. What? If you truly love them, stop hiding. The person you love stared at them. Because this, the third party gestured gently between them, happened because you were afraid to tell the truth. Those words hit harder than anger would have. Then the door closed. And for several seconds, the person you love simply stood there. No noise. No distraction. No one left to perform for. Only truth. Your truth. Their truth. The truth they had been running from. And suddenly, memories of you began rushing back. Your smile. Your voice. A conversation they replayed more times than you would ever guess. A moment when you looked at them and they wondered whether you could see straight through them. Something kind you once said that they never forgot. Even ordinary moments had become important in hindsight. That is the strange thing about meaningful connections. Sometimes you do not understand the significance of a moment while living it. Only later do you realize. That mattered. That changed me. That stayed. The person you love sat down. Their phone was nearby. And your name was somewhere inside it. Maybe in an old conversation. Maybe in their contacts. Maybe buried beneath months of silence. But suddenly that distance felt unbearable. They picked up the phone. Put it down. Picked it up again. This happened several times. Don't skip. Because the message they almost sent matters. They typed. Can we talk? Then deleted it. Too ordinary. They typed. I've been thinking about you. Deleted. Too vague. They typed. I need to tell you something. Their finger hovered over send. Still, they hesitated. Because after hiding for so long, how do you suddenly explain everything? How do you say, I tried to move on, but something inside me kept returning to you? How do you admit, I was afraid of how much this mattered? How do you confess, I compared connections without meaning to, and somehow my heart kept measuring everything against what I felt with you? How do you explain that someone else finally had to say aloud what you had refused to admit to yourself? The person you love stared at your name. And something inside them finally became clear. They could continue living through fear. Or they could risk honesty. That does not guarantee an outcome. Love never gives anyone ownership over another person's answer. But honesty gives both people the opportunity to choose freely. And perhaps that was the lesson hidden inside everything that happened. The third party had not simply walked away. They had removed the final excuse. Now the person you love could no longer say, I don't know how I feel. They knew. They could no longer say, maybe this will disappear. It had not. They could no longer pretend that avoiding the truth protected everyone. Avoidance had already caused pain. Stay till the end. Because later that night, something else happened. The third party sent one final message. The person you love opened it cautiously. It said, "I hope someday you understand that I'm not leaving because I hate you. I'm leaving because I finally believe what your heart has been telling me." The person you love read it twice. Then another message arrived. "And if you choose to go after them, go honestly." That was all. No bitterness. No attempt to reopen the conversation. Just closure. And strangely, those words created a feeling the person you love had not experienced in a long time. Clarity. For months, perhaps longer, they had been emotionally divided. One part wanted safety. Another wanted truth. One part wanted predictability. Another kept whispering your name. One part feared rejection. Another feared living forever without knowing what might have happened. And now those competing voices had become one. Tell the truth. Not because they were guaranteed your love. Not because the universe owed them a perfect ending. But because love hidden indefinitely eventually becomes regret. And regret was beginning to frighten them more than rejection. Something huge is waiting for you. The next morning, the person you love woke earlier than usual. For a moment, they forgot what had happened. Then everything returned. The conversation. The tears. The door closing. The final message. Your name. They reached for their phone. Still there. The unsent message. I need to tell you something. They read it again. Then erased it. Not because they had changed their mind. Because they finally understood that 3 vague sentences would not be enough. If they were going to speak, they wanted to speak honestly. So they started again. I don't know how you'll receive this. Pause. But I owe you the truth. Pause. There are things I should have said a long time ago. Their heart began racing. Every word made the possibility more real. They continued. I kept telling myself that distance would make everything simpler. Pause. It didn't. Then they stopped. Because the next sentence was the sentence they had avoided for so long. The sentence that would expose everything. Their finger rested over the screen. They whispered your name. And then they typed. My feelings for you never disappeared. They stared at those words. For the first time, the truth existed outside their thoughts. It was visible. Real. Impossible to pretend away. But they still did not press send. Not yet. There was something they needed to understand first. Why you? Why had this feeling survived? Why did memories of you continue returning? Why did the possibility of losing you completely feel heavier than they expected? And the answer was not something dramatic. It was something more meaningful. With you, they remembered feeling seen. Not admired. Not chased. Seen. There is a difference. Being admired can make someone feel important. Being seen makes someone feel understood. You notice things. Perhaps tiny things. A change in their tone. A moment when they were quieter than usual. A dream they mentioned casually. A fear hidden inside a joke. Maybe you remembered something they assumed everyone would forget. Maybe you offered kindness when they expected judgment. Whatever form it took, something about your presence reached beneath the surface. And once someone has experienced that kind of recognition, ordinary connection can feel strangely incomplete. The person you love finally understood. They were not simply missing you. They were missing who they felt capable of being around you. Don't skip now. Because this is where the title of this story becomes real. The third party had walked away in tears. But before the final separation, there had been one last exchange that the person you love could not stop replaying. At the doorway, the third party had asked. "Say it." The person you love looked confused. "Say what?" "The truth. Just once. Not for me. For yourself." Silence. The third party wiped their tears. "Who do you love?" The person you love tried to look away. "No. Look at me." They did. "Who?" And after months of avoidance, the answer finally came. "You're not the one I love." The third party inhaled slowly. Then asked. "Who is?" Your name was spoken. The room became still. And then came the words that changed everything. "You're the one I love." Not spoken to the third party. Spoken about you. A truth finally given a voice. The third party nodded through tears. As painful as it was, they finally had the answer they had been searching for. And the person you love finally heard themselves say aloud what they had spent so long trying not to admit. That was the turning point. Because sometimes the most powerful confession is the first one you make to yourself. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. The person you love spent the rest of that morning thinking about what those words demanded from them. Not possession. Not expectation. Courage. If they truly loved you, they had to respect your freedom to respond however you wished. They had to approach you without games. Without manipulation. Without trying to make you jealous. Without expecting you to erase whatever pain or confusion the past may have created. They had to come honestly. That realization humbled them. Because suddenly love was no longer about what they wanted to receive from you. It became about what truth they were willing to offer you. An explanation. An apology where needed. Clarity. Consistency. And patience. They began remembering every time you may have wondered where you stood. Every mixed signal. Every silence. Every moment when they could have made things clearer but did not. And for the first time, they considered the situation from your side. Maybe you had questioned whether they cared. Maybe you had wondered whether the connection had only existed in your imagination. Maybe you had slowly taught yourself to expect nothing. That possibility hurt. Because while they were protecting themselves from rejection, they may have accidentally taught you to stop waiting. Now the urgency felt different. It was not artificial urgency. Not, "I must control the outcome immediately." It was the urgency of finally understanding that time matters. People grow. Circumstances change. Doors do not remain open forever. And if something matters, eventually someone must be brave enough to say so. The person you love returned to the unfinished message. My feelings for you never disappeared. They added another line. I don't expect anything from you. I just don't want fear to keep speaking for me. They stopped. Read everything. Then added. If you're willing, I would like to talk honestly. Their thumb hovered over send. 1 second. 2. 3. Then the screen went dark. They had locked the phone. Still afraid. But this time something was different. They were not abandoning the message. They were gathering courage. Because after years of emotional avoidance, courage does not always arrive as a dramatic explosion. Sometimes courage arrives quietly. You breathe. You admit you are scared. And you do the honest thing anyway. Later, they opened the phone again. The message remained. They read every line. And just before they could make their decision, their phone vibrated. A notification appeared. For 1 second, they thought it might be you. Their heart jumped. But it was the third party. One final sentence. Don't make the same mistake twice. The person you love stared at it. That was the final push. Not toward you as though you were something to claim. Toward honesty. Toward accountability. Toward finally letting reality replace imagination. They returned to your message. Their thumb moved toward send. But before I tell you whether that message left their screen, there is one more truth you need to understand. The third party's tears were not the ending. They were the closing of one chapter. And your story cannot be built on someone else's sadness. If something new is meant to begin between two people, it must begin cleanly, with honesty, respect, patience, and free choice. That is why the third party walking away mattered. A triangle was becoming a straight line. No secret competition. No emotional confusion. No pretending. Just one person standing alone with the truth of their feelings and deciding what kind of person they wanted to become. And perhaps the most surprising transformation was this. For the first time, the person you love stopped asking, "Will they choose me?" Instead, they asked, "Can I become someone capable of showing up honestly?" That question changed everything. Because love is not proven by dramatic declarations alone. It is proven afterward. Through consistency. Through truth. Through listening. Through keeping promises. Through respecting boundaries. Through allowing another person to choose without pressure. Through staying present after the exciting confession is over. The person you love understood that saying, "You're the one I love," would mean very little unless their behavior eventually carried the same message. And this realization made them nervous. Because words are easy compared with change. But they were ready to begin. Don't skip. We are almost at the moment everything has been building toward. The phone was in their hand again. Your conversation was open. The message was waiting. Their heart was pounding. They imagined every possible outcome. You could respond warmly. You could need time. You could ask difficult questions. You could say you had moved forward. You could remain silent. They had no control over that. And finally, they understood that love was not about controlling your answer. It was about giving you the truth you deserved and accepting your freedom afterward. Their thumb hovered over the screen. This time they did not close the phone. They whispered, "No more hiding," and pressed send. The message disappeared from the typing box. Delivered. For several seconds, they simply stared at the screen. It was done. The truth was moving toward you. And suddenly the fear they had carried for so long transformed into something unexpected. Relief. They had finally stopped running. But the story was not finished. Because shortly afterward, something appeared on the screen. Something that made them sit completely still. A tiny indication that changed the atmosphere immediately. The message had been seen. You had opened it. Now every second felt enormous. Would you answer? Would you disappear? Would you ask the question they had been terrified to answer? The person you love placed the phone beside them. Picked it up again. Put it down. Walked across the room. Returned. Then the screen lit up. A response was coming. The typing indicator appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. Stopped again. Their breathing changed. Whatever you were writing was clearly not simple. And then, nothing. The typing indicator vanished. No message arrived. The person you love stared at the screen. Minutes passed. And for the first time, they experienced what you may once have experienced because of them. Uncertainty. Waiting. Wondering. Hoping. And in that silence, they learned something important. Honesty does not erase consequences. Sometimes when you take too long to speak, the other person needs time to believe what you are finally saying. So they waited. No second message. No pressure. No desperate explanation. They respected the silence. Hours later, the phone finally lit up again. This time, your name appeared. The person you love froze. There was a message. Short. Simple. But powerful enough to make their eyes fill with emotion. They opened it. And whatever they read made them understand that the conversation they had avoided for so long was finally about to happen. Not an imaginary conversation. Not another private rehearsal inside their head. A real one. Two people. Two perspectives. No third party standing between them. No pretending. No guarantees. Only honesty. And that is where everything truly begins. Because, "You're the one I love," was not the ending. It was the door. What happens after that door opens depends on something far more meaningful than destiny alone. It depends on truth. Timing. Forgiveness where appropriate. Mutual choice. And whether two people are willing to meet each other as they are now, not merely as they remember each other from the past. So stay till the end of this story, because something huge is waiting for you. The tears at the doorway were not meaningless. The silence was not meaningless. The confession was not meaningless. But neither were they promises of a perfect ending. They were an invitation to finally stop hiding. And somewhere, in the quiet after everything changed, the person you love looked at your name on their screen and whispered the sentence they were no longer afraid to admit. "You're the one I love." Then another message appeared. And when they read the first few words, their entire expression changed. Because your response contained something they had never expected you to say. Something connected to the past. Something you had been holding inside too. Something that could explain why this connection had never completely disappeared. And before this story reaches its final truth, that secret will have to come into the light. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Because the confession was only the beginning. Something huge is waiting for you.